Let's begin by taking a look at the needs analysis for your instructional design project. Now, your needs analysis comprises of 4 separate sections. The first one is a description of the problem. So over here, you're going to give a little bit of an overview of the organization and describe the problem that exists, the training gap that you have identified. Now, approach it from this perspective. You are writing this for someone who is not aware of your organization or the specifics of how your organization works. So your reader does not have any clue about your context. Your description should provide them with enough of an understanding of that context. So provide sufficient details for that, but don't overload with the details either. Remember, when you're using acronyms, you do want to provide the full form of them. Also be careful with jargon, because again, remember, you're writing this for an outsider who does not know your specific context. Okay, so that's the description of the problem. Let's look at audience and learner characteristics. Now, who is the audience for this training? So if it's the employees in your organization, you're going to give a breakdown of the audience characteristics. Now, this has to be detailed. So what are the elements that I am looking for? You want to talk about age, because that's going to be a big factor in how you design your training. You want to talk about gender, if that's going to be a factor. If it isn't, you don't need to. What about their language proficiency? What about their educational level? And then their technology proficiency. So all these are elements that you want to clearly list out when you're talking about your audience characteristics. Okay. Do they all have access to the same technologies and resources? Are they all coming from the same experience level, or do you have some new employees and some older, more experienced employees? All of that will impact your training decisions, so that has to be dealt with in the audience and learner characteristics. The more detail you provide, the better for that section. Current resource and training analysis. So before you develop any training program, you want to take a step back and do some research, as in what currently exists. Now, many organizations are so huge that you just don't know what other departments are providing. And for all you know, the training that you're identifying might actually be handled by someone else. Or you might have a package that's readily available outside as well. So what are the resources that are available and the training that is being provided? Where are you at now? So in addition to the current training, when you're talking about current resources, you also want to think about what is being provided to your employees. So resources could be they all have access to technical manuals, or they all have access to laptops or iPads, or they all have access to a specific app on the phone. Those are resources that are available to them. And resources for your training could also be things like you have a training room currently available, or a conference room that you can use. What other resources? You already have certain training manuals that you can leverage to teach these people, which means you don't need to create the content of it. You just need to be able to find a better way to convey that content, right? So those are things that you want to think about, and that is the research that you do when you're talking about what resources and training currently exists in your organization, or the organization you're working with for this project. And then what are the constraints? So before you develop a training program, you want to see what are the constraints that are there. For example, if the employees only get 1 hour off for lunch and they are all on some kind of an assembly line kind of setup, they really can't be pulled out of their work spot to come and do a training. Well, that's a constraint, isn't it? How are you going to find the time to do training? Or if you're working with help desk personnel, when will you have the time to get all the help desk personnel together to provide you training? Because remember, when you're pulling all the personnel out of the help desk environment, who's going to be manning the help desk? So those are constraints that you have. A common constraint is, of course, always money, because money works in different ways. You need money to create the resources for your training. You need money to get a trainer. You need money for the conference room and all those other facilities that you need for your training. In addition, when you're pulling employees out of their job environment and putting them in training, that is a cost. There is a cost incurred for the lost time in work time, right? So that is also a factor for money that you have to consider, and money is always a constraint. So figuring out where the money is going to come from is another form of constraint. What other constraints could there be? Maybe you need to do a technology training, but there's only one computer available. Well, that's a constraint. So you're going to identify the different constraints for the particular scenario that you're working with. Now remember, I've provided you with an opportunity to work on a scenario that is relevant to you, which means you really want to put in some effort, do a bit of digging, talk to people in the organization when you're identifying these things, and make it meaningful. Because as you work through this, remember, this is also a kind of a promotion of yourself, right? If you talk to your immediate boss and you tell them, I'm doing this for my course, but it's something that we could also use at our organization, it gives you a better credibility as well. So think about it and make it more meaningful for you. Don't do it just because it's an assignment and I'm making you do it. How meaningful it is to you depends on you and what you put into it. And that is the needs analysis. Couple of things to remember. For each of these sections, like description, the audience, the current resources, each section should be 250 to 500 words in length, and it has to address the topic in sufficient depth. So I want you to put in some effort in this. And then the grading criteria, the detailed grading criteria is provided in the assignment section of Canvas, so please do check it out. Remember, grading criteria and grading rubrics are a checklist for you to make sure that you're on track in your assignment. So when I approach any assignment that I'm doing for any training that I do, I read the assignment, but then I also go and look at the grading rubric. Because for me, if I'm hitting all the elements of the grading rubric, then I know I'm on track. So remember to check the grading criteria and the rubric, and always use it as a checklist. It's just good practice.